A Woman's Reaction to The Mystery Method by Mystery with Chris Odom. Well, I lied. I said we were going to do chapters 3 and 4 this week, and instead I think we're just going to do chapter 3. I was looking at it, and there was enough stuff in there that was interesting that I kind of wanted to talk about, and I figured that that was enough for a full video. So we are going to be talking about chapter 3 this week instead of 3 and 4. In fact, when a woman explains something, she will often use emotions as legitimate reasons unto themselves. Just feeling something to be true is reason enough. I have known women like this. Honestly, it's really annoying because I have to relate to these people. And like it's always kind of difficult for me. Like I know it's definitely difficult for my husband. My husband is very logic oriented, and I'm more of a middle grounder, so I kind of manage to meet people on their own level kind of a lot more easily than he does. And there are some people that I know who are just, everything's about their feelings. I feel this, I feel that, I feel this other thing. Everything that they perceive in the world around them is based off of what they feel about it. It's like, it's very difficult for me to have conversations with these people. I think I would have been more tempted to go into psychology if I actually gave a shit about people's feelings. Like, you know, I was looking at, things that I could do with my life, and psychology was right there. It was like, well, it's interesting. It's like, ooh, that's interesting. But you'd have to give a shit about people's feelings, and I'm not that kind of a person. I'm just no good at that. So, instead I became a stripper, which is so much better, I guess. What a woman thinks she likes or says she likes is not necessarily what she responds to in reality. This is kind of true. Like, you see that with the whole nice guy thing. Women say they want a nice guy, and they walk all over a nice guy, and then they leave him for a not so nice guy. Women say they want a man who acts like an easily trainable puppy, but that's not actually what turns them on sexually. And I wonder why that is, and I sometimes think that maybe it's just the female blue pill. Like, we're all taught, this is what you should want. You should want a guy who understands your feelings. You should want a guy who cares about you. You should want a guy who's nice. And really, that's not what we want. We want a guy who turns us on. And a guy who's nice and harmless and sweet and syrupy and milk toast is not really going to turn us on. If a woman wants to determine if you're being real with her, she won't use logic to analyze what you said for inconsistencies. Instead, she'll observe your actions to see if you appear congruent with what you are saying. Women follow their intuition over analysis. I'm looking back at my situation with my husband when we started dating, and yes and no. On the one hand, when I first read this paragraph, I thought to myself, well, no, because I remember watching my husband like a hawk. I remember weighing every single thing he said and measuring it up with all the other things he said, looking for lies or inconsistencies, because the things he was saying were so extraordinary that I was not entirely certain they were possible. And it was because he was an extraordinary man. But I kept on looking at everything he said and thinking, okay, well, does this actually add up with this? Does the timeline fit? Does his experience with, thing A that he says he did match up with thing B that he says he did? That's not intuition. That's probably more of a logical kind of thing. And at the same time, when I first met him, like, the party that we both went to. So the second time I ever saw him, I invited him back to my apartment. And we walk in the door, and I start brewing myself some coffee right away because I'm at home, and so I just kind of bustle about brewing my coffee. And he's standing there in the doorway of my apartment looking around. He's kind of like, you trusted me to come to your apartment. I was like, yeah. He's like, you're all alone here. I'm like, yeah. He's like, how did you know I'm not going to hurt you? And I just looked at him. I was like, well, you're not. And I was reasonably confident about this because I had been an exotic dancer for a long time, and I'd hung out with a lot of shady people. And some of them were quite dangerous. And, you know, I just didn't get a very predatory vibe from him. And there comes a point, if you're hanging out with enough shady, predatory, potentially dangerous people, you kind of just look at it and think, well, if this person's going to kill me, they're going to kill me. There's not a hell of a lot that I'm going to be able to do about it. I can either hang out with them and risk my life, or I can not hang out with them, and I'd prefer to risk my life. So there was definitely some intuition going on there, especially early on when I didn't really know anything about him. But the more I listened to him and the more I talked to him, the more logic came into play. The thing is, I think when a woman meets a man, she doesn't have enough information about him to start applying logic. She kind of has to rely on her intuition. And this is one of those things, like a lot of men that I've seen, like I think even Tomasi to a certain extent, was rather, they tend to poo-poo at women's intuition. Because women, of course, make a big deal about their intuition. Oh, my intuition tells me this, my intuition tells me that. I had a friend once call me up and tell me that I needed to quit school and move across the country to take care of her because she had the feeling that she might be pregnant and she needed someone to help her raise her baby. I was like, have you taken a pregnancy test yet? She's like, no, but I just know. Women just know. She wasn't even pregnant, long story short. Women talk big about their intuition, but they're not always particularly correct in that. However, when it comes to meeting a guy for the first time, you don't have anything to go on but your intuition sometimes. You know, if you don't know anything about him, if you don't know who his friends are, if they haven't talked him up beforehand, you do not know who this person is. And what I've noticed is, when it comes to dating, my subconscious, I'm assuming is my subconscious, takes in information and picks it up and realizes it a lot quicker than my more conscious mind does. And so I'll have a reaction to a person, either a very positive one or a very negative one. And I won't necessarily know why. And I kind of keep that in the back of my mind as I'm talking to them, and I gather information, but I keep in mind that I either have a good feeling or a bad feeling about that person. And more often than not, once I get to know them well enough, I'll start to understand why I have a bad feeling about that person. Or, you know, a good feeling about that person too. It's little details. And as you get to know them better and as you spend more time with them, you start to realize what those little details are and what those little details are saying about them. But when you first meet someone, like right away, you have to make a snap judgment about them. You have to rely on intuition. And I think everybody does this whenever they meet a new person. But for women, you know, meeting men, it's usually, okay, you're trying to have sex with me. Because you're a dude with a penis and I'm a woman with a vagina. You're definitely trying to have sex with me. Either that or you're trying to have sex with somebody around me. But, you know, safe bet, you're probably going to be perfectly happy to have sex with me if I let my guard down. So I have to rely on every little piece of information I can get a hold of. And the first information I'm going to get is, you know, just intuition. So, you know, I wouldn't make too light of women's intuition. There have been some guys I've dated against my better judgment because everybody was like, oh, you know, he's such a good guy. I'm like, I don't think so. It's like, oh no, he's such a good guy. No, he's a monster. Don't date him. He's awful. He stinks. Peacock theory. You don't have to wear a top hat right out of the chute, but as my friend's example suggests, try wearing at least one item of clothing curious looking enough to get people's attention. Mystery has been criticized a lot for his eccentric appearance. And that was one of the first things I learned about when I found out who Mystery was, because I didn't know who Mystery was until I read The Rational Male, and then I was like, okay, who's this Mystery guy he's referring to? Looked it up, and goggles and a fuzzy top hat, definitely unique. A lot of people have made fun of that. But he's not entirely wrong. First of all, everybody dresses to give other people an impression. Everybody. No matter who you are, no matter what, you're always dressing to give other people an impression. Me, dressing the way I do, I'm trying to give other people an impression. the reason that I don't do my videos in a bikini, because I have a ton of bikinis from work, and I kept the most flattering ones. So I kept the ones that I like to wear to work because they made me lots of money. The reason I'm not wearing that get up right now is because that's not the impression that I want to give you guys. The reason I'm not wearing tons of makeup right now is that's not the impression I want to give you guys. There's a reason that people dress the way they dress. And so being aware of the kind of message that you're sending out to the world when you pick out your clothing, when you're trying to attract a woman, that's reasonably important. But there's more to it than that. There's that, and then there's also the other reason for peacocking, which is, rather clever. Wear something that she can talk about. And if you don't want to wear something that she can talk about, have something readily available. He talks about props, and I haven't gotten really into that part of the book too much, but have something readily available that she can pick out to talk about if there's a lull in the conversation. If she's interested in you and she wants to talk to you, but she doesn't know what to say. Because women are horrible at all this stuff. In this book, everything in this book, women suck at. Just definitely suck at. I've dealt with enough lesbians to know that, like, when it comes to initiating things, they suck. When it comes to keeping things going, they really suck. Lesbians, at least in my experience, and I mean, I worked in a strip club, and so we were all hanging out in our underwear in the back room, but I mean, the girls that were trying to get me to sleep with them, their idea of making any kind of an overture was literally just walking up to me and kissing me and seeing how I handled it. And then they back off. They'd be surprised that I was willing to kiss them, and then they back off, and they just wait for me to do something about it. And by that point, I'd already dated strippers, and it was like, yeah, I don't need that level of crazy in my life. So I just kind of go about my day. And these poor women, they wouldn't know what to do. Oh, God. When I got engaged to my husband, there was this one gal who'd been trying to get me into bed for a while, and she found out I was engaged, and she was like, well, yeah, but you can still sleep with women, right? And I was like, no, I think that's it. And she realized that her window of opportunity with me was very rapidly closing. And so we were hanging out, and I think there was I think it was like a special or a staff meeting or something. Anyway, we were all hanging out, and she's standing behind me, and all of a sudden I feel this hand squeezing on my butt. And it was like, okay, that's not going to change my mind either. Women are just, they're not good at approaching, and they're not good at keeping a thing going once it's started. They need low-hanging fruit. Just take it from me. Women need low-hanging fruit in their relationships. When it comes to just first meeting somebody, just first starting to get to know them, just first initiating conversations with them, like all that stuff, you need something easy that they can grab onto. And so, something easy, readily at hand. A nifty looking pendant. I've seen a lot of guys wearing nifty looking pendants. Who knew what they were doing. I knew one guy who was a pickup artist who got a Cookie Monster t-shirt, and he wore that to a club. It's like, well, it's attention getting, and it's definitely a conversation piece. You don't need a fuzzy hat. Like, you don't need to dress in something that's going to be so conspicuous that it's going to look too unusual, or, you don't necessarily need to go over the top. You do need to have some very readily available way of getting her, of offering her an easy to reach conversation piece. So the idea of peacocking is, as much as people make fun of it, it actually serves some pretty good purposes. Number one, being aware of the messages that you're sending her through your clothing, through your hair, through your appearance. Number two, just give women some easy things to grab onto when you're first starting to talk to them. Once they get to know you, then they have things they want to ask you about. Until they get to know you, it's kind of like, okay, I'm here. Are you interesting or not? Anti-slut defense. The word slut is a weapon women use against other women in an attempt to lower the competitor's perceived social value. Yeah, absolutely. Um, when I was like this goody two shoes church girl, like before I became a stripper, like I know that's probably a little difficult for a lot of you guys to really think about. Not a lot of you, but some of you out there who are listening. I'm sure it's very difficult for you to imagine me not being a total slut, like dyed in the wool, came out of the womb, slutting it up already, just a thought from day one. But honestly, like when I was a teenager, all throughout my teenage years, actually, very goody two shoes, very virginal. I didn't date all throughout high school. I wasn't interested in dating throughout high school. I wanted to stay a virgin till I was married because I had always heard that was the best way to do things. I was a very good girl. Like I was a ridiculously good girl. And people still called me a slut. It was really funny because they had more sexual experience than I did. They had more sexual experience than I was interested in having. They were more interested in sex than I was, and they were still calling me a slut. And I mean, I remember at my church, this one church I went to, like there was a very handsome young man there. His family moved away. Otherwise, I probably would have had more reasons to stay in my hometown. Handsome young man, very intelligent, very intriguing. And I liked hanging out with him because he was a science geek, and I thought that was cool. And the girls in the church who were notably not as pretty as I was, and you might look at me and say, "Well, you're not that hot." It's like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." But imagine going a few steps lower, okay? Um, they they did everything in their power to keep me away from him, and I was like, this guy's my friend. Why can't I be with my friend? Why can't I hang out with my friend? Because I was very naively looking at it and saying, he's a friend. I think he's interesting. He's into sciencey geeky stuff. I'm into sciencey geeky stuff. We should hang out together. They were looking at it as, you're prettier than we are and you want to hang out with the guy that we want. And that's not okay. Women play vicious games with one another. Absolutely vicious. Heartless, ruthless, vicious games. No questions about it. Women are ruthless. And they are incredibly backstabbing. If you meet women who like just don't hang out with other women, unless those other women in question are like particularly unusual, exceptional examples, but just basically no other women, no girlfriends. I was like that. There's a reason. Women are competitive, evil bitches, and I didn't like competing. I didn't care to compete. I didn't have an interest in competition. I either got the guy or I didn't get the guy. I did that on my own merits. I didn't need to disqualify my competitors. And I didn't like my competitors hanging out and trying to disqualify me, so screw them. I just stayed away. A lot of guys have criticized me, like in the comments section, for hanging out with so many dudes and leading them all on. It's like, well, I couldn't hang out with women. That's not hamstering. That's not me making up excuses. I was not going to hang out with those evil, ruthless, bloodthirsty bitches because I respect myself too much to do that. But if instead you were to say, hey, let's stop by my place on the way to that party, I have to show you my tropical fish, she now has an excuse and a plausible deniability to stop by your place and then, oopsie, have sex with you. I actually had that happen to me so many times when I was single. Like, guys would invite me over to their place for any number of reasons, and I'd be like, okay, you want to go over to you want to go back to my apartment and try out the CD? Okay, cool. You just bought a new CD. Why not? You want to go look at your tropical fish. You want to go watch a movie. You want to go study for class. I would go over to these guys' places or go hang out with these guys. We'd be alone. I'd be like, okay, I brought my pencils. I brought my books. I brought my notes. Let's start studying. And they'd be like, hey, let's have sex. And it's like, hey, let's study. Like, that's why I came here. I would get so annoyed because this happened to me so often where guys would like invite me over and it was just to hang out, and then they didn't want to hang out, and then I'd have to extricate myself from this really sticky situation where they thought that if they just pushed hard enough they were going to get some, and I was not interested in the least. I am not so sure about plausible deniability. At the same time, I do understand why you might want to, like, why it would be good advice to say, hey, let's go over to my house to watch a movie, to look at my tropical fish, to just chill out for a while. You do kind of want to give her that excuse so that, if she does decide that she's not interested, I don't know, you can kind of get a better test at that point if she's interested. You can see if she's interested. And if she's not interested, you're not being too pushy. So I can see how that would work. I can see how that would be good advice. So here we are in the new location. It's not a huge house, so most of the rooms serve dual purposes. And so in the course of making my videos, I sometimes have to relocate. So it's not enough for her to be attracted to you. She must become invested in her interaction with you before parting. I'm so happy he talks about this, because one of the things that I was thinking about while reading Rational Male, how do you prevent a woman from leaving a man? How do you prevent her from divorcing him? How do you prevent her from abandoning him? How do you prevent a woman from leaving a man? Because there's all this information on what men should do to prevent divorce, what men should do to keep a relationship healthy and alive and stable, behaviorally convincing her that a man is alpha. What do women need to be doing? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that a woman's investment is what makes the difference. For men, there's that whole rule, you cannot negotiate desire. But that's for men. Men can't win a woman's heart by doing stuff for her constantly, by buying her the flowers and the chocolates, by taking out the garbage, by doing chores around the house, by earning her enough money to have a roof over her head. That's not what's going to keep her love and affection. If a woman invests herself in a man, that's a man that she wants to keep. And so the thing I was thinking about, and I have to ponder that idea a bit more, but I think Mystery touches on it perfectly here. The more a woman invests herself in a man, the more she's going to stick to him. The more time I spend on my husband, the more I invest myself in my relationship with my husband, the more healthy our relationship is going to be. And that's kind of true of any relationship, male, female, doesn't really matter what gender you are. But I think it's particularly important with women. The fact that I take the time and I invest myself in doing things for him, the fact that I make him coffee in the mornings, most mornings. This morning was really crazy. One of the cats vomited on the rug, and then the kids broke a glass, and so there was broken glass everywhere. But the fact that I'm making these investments in my relationship with him specifically, it means that I'm paying much less attention to other men. I'm not interested in other men because I'm so busy investing time and energy in my husband. That's one of the reasons I think it's kind of laughable why all these men are always telling me, well, when you divorce your husband, you're not going to be so confident about your relationship. And it's like, I'm not going to divorce my husband. That's kind of the point. That's not going to happen. I can say this with, relative confidence. And they would probably argue back, well, everybody's confident about it until they, file divorce papers. No, I'm really confident that I'm not going to divorce my husband. And part of it, I think, is the fact that I'm investing myself in my relationship with him. I'm doing things for him. And I think, maybe this is another one of those situations where we've gotten our dating and our relationship advice just flip-flopped around, where we're giving men advice that we really should be giving to women, and women advice that we should really be giving to men. It was so feminist and daring to say, hey, don't bring him sandwiches, don't be the family servant, back in the 70s or whenever. But now, now I'm looking at it and thinking the fact that I do small acts of service to him, the fact that I invest myself and invest effort into pleasing him and making his life better and more comfortable, that's energy that I'm spending on my relationship with him that might otherwise be spent on building relationships with other men. Instead, that energy is all turned toward him. And because of that, my chances of, running off with some other man, not likely. Because my investment is in him. And that's where my interest lies. So the fact that Mystery is talking about the value of investment, I think it's important when you first meet a woman. You want her to invest herself in you. You want her to invest her time in you. You want her to invest energy in getting to know you better. You want her to be putting as much interest and energy into forming a bond with you as you're putting into forming a bond with her. Perhaps even more so, because of the power dynamic. Whoever's the most interested, whoever needs the other the most, they have the least power. And you, as a man, because of hypergamy, you want to maintain just a little bit of an edge there. Not a huge edge. You don't want to be like some sort of slave driver, but you want to have a little bit of a step up on her. That's honestly, that's probably how a healthy relationship is formed. At least that's how my relationship with my husband goes. And I know it was how my parents' relationship goes, although they would argue up and down that they're equals. I know my mom still followed my dad's lead. And so, I think it doesn't have to be a huge step up, but you just need that little tiny bit more power. So you do want a woman investing herself in you when you first meet her. But as the relationship goes on, like presumably you're doing all this to have more than just a series of one night stands, because that would get really old really fast, I think. For some guys it's like, no, what are you talking about? Of course it doesn't get old. For the majority of people, it gets old. It's empty sex. It's kind of boring. There's nothing much to it. Like, who cares? As the relationship goes on, as it grows and as it deepens, you still want your woman to be investing herself in her relationship with you. And I think that's what makes the relationship more healthy and more stable. Rating a woman's appearance. I don't even know what to make of this one. Like, I read it, and I don't know where I fall on the rating scale. So there was this really fun game that these scientists played. And I was watching National Geographic, some documentary. I wish I could find the documentary because I'd love to rewatch it. But it was a National Geographic documentary, and these scientists got 10 men and 10 women together. And they wrote a number on every person's forehead. Each of the men, one number going from 1 to 10, and going, up from 1 to 10. And each of the women, one number going up from 1 to 10. And then they set them loose in a room and told them, without having any clue what their number was, that they needed to go and find the highest possible number that was willing to pair up with them. I mean, you get the idea. It was basically like a little miniature mating game. And it was very interesting because at the end of the mating game, like everybody's mingling around, they're all, meeting up with each other, and, a 7 smiles at somebody and they look at it and go, I don't know, I think it can do better. And so they leave the 7, they circle around a little bit, and then later on they find that same 7 and they're like, well, maybe. The important thing was that nobody actually knew what their own number was. The 1 didn't know she was a 1. The 10 didn't know she was a 10. People are not particularly good at figuring out their own level of attractiveness. Any guy who goes on like Tinder or whatever dating sites are out there, dating apps are out there, and looks at the women who are like, I'm a princess, I'm beautiful, I'm 1 in a million, and, she's slobby looking and fat and gross and probably has bad hygiene, and he just kind of looks at it like, what? They don't have an accurate idea of what their own level of attraction to other people is. I spent years surrounded by beautiful pole dancers, women who were perfectly toned, perfectly fit, perfect muscle definition, beautiful features, perfect makeup, clothes that accentuated all their best features. Like they would go walking around like little goddesses in a room full of men who were all staring and drooling at them. I was surrounded by that. That was my normal. Baseline normal for me was all these just beautiful, beautiful women at the very peak of their health and beauty, early 20s, mid 20s. Lovely, lovely women. That was what I saw every day when I went to work. That was normal for me. And it was kind of a shock leaving my workforce and meeting normal people. And they were fat. And I remember being somewhat confused by this. Like, is everybody really that fat? Like, have I just not been paying attention? So I've always been curious about that. Like, I mean, right now I'm 33, dude. Don't compare me to 20-year-olds. I mean, I would not do well. But I do look back and wonder, like, where was I on that scale? 9 times out of 10, when a woman says, I have a boyfriend, what this translates to is, you just telegraphed too much interest. I did this with my husband all the time. I told him I had a boyfriend, and I mean, there was a guy that I had a friends with benefits relationship with, and so I was constantly telling my future husband that I was in a relationship with this other man, and that we were together, and that I loved him, and he was just so awesome, and it was a defense mechanism. Cat break. It was a defense mechanism. I was very concerned that I would be getting into a sexual relationship with this man that I didn't know very well, that I was a little, like, I really liked him. I really liked him. And I was afraid that if I slept with him too soon, the relationship would fizzle out and die, and then I'd lose my awesome new friend that I had just found. And I wanted to keep him as a friend. And you might be thinking, oh, well, that's a beta male thing. Like, you keep a guy as an orbiter, or you keep him as a friend. And it's like, no, you don't understand. I had never met anybody this fascinating in my entire life. You don't just have sex with someone like that and then throw them away. You keep them around. You keep them around as long as possible. And so I was afraid that having sex with him, even though he was, admittedly rather attractive, I was afraid that that was going to just completely ruin things. Like, you have sex with him and then that's it. It's over. He moves on to whatever new interesting thing he's going to do, and you never see him again, and that's the end of your fun, fascinating friend that you really, really like, that you don't want to lose. Oh, you just fucked up. So I was very careful to keep a solid wall between me and him. And so, of course, I have a boyfriend. My boyfriend. I have a boyfriend. Boyfriend, 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 boyfriend. My husband actually makes fun of me. Even to this day, he makes fun of me about this because I was mentioning my boyfriends every other minute. And mostly it was just to keep him at arm's length and to keep the relationship that I was building with him safe in a way. As funny as that sounds. I'm not sure that every girl who talks about having a boyfriend is doing that. A lot of them are just, as Mystery says, warning you that you've telegraphed too much interest. Now they're a little concerned that you might be trying to get into bed with them, and they're not ready for that. They're not ready for that because they're not interested, or because they haven't had enough time to properly assess you to determine whether or not they are interested. Or, I mean, that was my situation with my husband. Like, I was kind of interested, but at the same time I didn't know him well enough, and I was still getting a feel for him, and I mean, it took a while. It took some time. Yeah, just because a woman says she has a boyfriend, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it can mean many different things. It's definitely something to pay attention to. It's not necessarily a deal breaker, but sometimes it is a deal breaker, And a woman who's smart, and if she's loyal to her boyfriend, she's being smart about this, or, or her husband. I have a boyfriend. Okay, you're telegraphing too much interest still, so I'm going to tell you to go away. If you push a little too hard, you'll push her straight away from you. I don't advise guys to sleep with other guys' girlfriends, but I do know that there are certain circumstances where women will be like, I have a boyfriend, to just keep you at a bit of a distance. So that is it for chapter 3. There's a lot more in this chapter that I didn't discuss. I kind of don't want to go over every single paragraph in some of these things because I want to give you guys enough to read the book and actually get new information out of it. But there was a lot of stuff there that was actually really good advice. That's one of the things that's been really pleasant in reading this book. Like, a lot of people, I think, have said that this stuff is that mystery method is, outdated, and I'm not sure how true that is. Um, I think that this was one of the earlier bits of writing that came out on pickup artistry. And I think some of the core ideas and concepts are still around, which is one of the reasons that I'm doing the review of this one, and not like a more modern pickup artistry book, because I wanted to get an idea for the core concepts. I wanted to get an idea for the terminology. I wanted to feel out just what it was all about, what the origins of these ideas were. And so far, it's actually been a pretty good read. I don't agree with him on everything, but this chapter was a really good chapter. And so I do agree with him on pretty much most of what he writes. I'm a little leery of anti-slut defense, not because I think it's not true, but because I have to figure out how well it applies to me. Because it's one of those things where you have the knee-jerk reaction like, oh, I don't do that. And then you think back over and it's like, yeah, how many times have I done that? I do that. So I have to think about that one a bit. But so far so good. Like, I'm looking forward to the next chapter. I hope it's as good as this one was. This one was actually a pretty good chapter. I'm glad I'm not bunching up my chapters anymore. Like, okay, there's not enough information to fit into one whole video here. Um, so yeah, this is good. I'm excited. We're starting to get into the swing of things. Next week we'll do chapter 4, and I'll talk to you guys later.